Alright, hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of my daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 24, and today, I actually gotta look this up real quick. So, Mr. Sims Music commented on yesterday's vlog talking about the Essence 20 system, specifically the Transformers RPG, and asking for some kind of tips on how to GM it. And newsflash, some of the most popular videos on this channel are all Essence 20 related. I would love to turn this into an Essence 20 only channel, but I don't know if that would go any better than when I was exclusively Dungeons and Dragons. But also, I'm not currently running an Essence 20 campaign, so it makes things slightly hotter. But I do think it's a good idea to talk about that specifically because two things. One, Transformers is super cool. Two, I think there's a lot of things that you can take away from some of the tips I'm going to talk about for running a Transformers RPG campaign that really applies to any campaign that's using a pre-built world. Because that's technically what the Transformers RPG is it's an RPG that uses the Essence 20 system that has a default setting, which is the Transformers universe. And the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between Garry and Ron Perlman. Now, for those of you wondering what in the hell does that have to do with Transformers, let's get into this. So, my history of Transformers, when the original cartoon came out, I was a fetus. And I think it actually came out. I'm going to look this up for the original Transformers cartoon original. What was it? Yeah, 84 to 87. So I didn't exist when the original Transformers cartoon was airing. Now, obviously, reruns were the thing. I remember every so often catching bits and pieces of it when I was really young. But I didn't get into Transformers until the mid to late 90s when Beast Wars came out. For anyone that is unaware, Beast Wars was technically both a sequel and a prequel to what's referred to as Generation 1, which is the original Transformers with the Autobots led by Optimus Prime and, Megatron leading the Decepticons. And they had, I actually watched somebody, because I'm a music geek, I watched somebody actually look at the music for the original Transformers, and it uses this technique called mixed meter, which is basically the meter of the music changes. And normally mixed meter still follows kind of a pattern, and the meter for and for those of you who don't know, meter is basically how many beats are in a measure and how those beats are measured. So the kind of default time, the default meter, which is called common time, is 4/4. So there's 4 beats in a measure, and a quarter note equals 1 beat. There's lots of other ones. 3/4 is really common as well. Most people know that as a waltz. That's the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. And then you can get into the eighth note ones, 6/8, 9/8, 12/8, and they just have kind of a triplet feel and stuff. So the original Transformers music randomly switches between common time, 3/4, 2/4, and a couple weird meters that are just kind of blown in there, and it's really difficult to count it because it adds these random measures that don't fit in anywhere else. And yeah, so really fascinating. So anyway, that's what the original Transformers were, and then other than Beast Wars, every time a new Transformers thing has come out, generally, it has returned to the idea of Optimus Prime versus Megatron. Even when we go to the Transformers movies, it is Optimus Prime versus Megatron. And the cool thing about the Transformers movies is the original voice of Optimus Prime, Peter Cullen, came back. And Peter Cullen is probably one of the greatest voice actors currently working. And he has this amazing voice for Optimus Prime. It is so iconic. And when the first Transformers movie by Michael Bay came out and people heard Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime, they lost their minds. So what does Garry Chalk and Ron Perlman have to do with it? Well, in Beast Wars, because it's both a sequel and a prequel, Optimus Prime is gone. And there is a new leader of a new group. It's no longer Autobots versus Decepticons. It's Maximals versus Predacons. And the Maximals are led by a robot named Optimus Primal. See what they did there? Because it's the Primal, because they're beasts. Oh! Okay, so Optimus Primal was voiced by a voice actor named Garry Chalk. Which I didn't realize. I actually knew him from other things. I'm a huge fan of the Stargate series and the Stargate franchise. And Garry Chalk actually plays the Russian the Russian like representative for the Russian military when slight spoiler alert for like season 4 or 5 of SG-1. Eventually. The U.S. has to partner with Russia to run the Stargate program. And so Garry Chalk played the kind of Russian military leader that was the liaison to Stargate Command. And he plays it perfectly. Like, he sounds Russian. Like, the character's really good. It was a small part. Like, he wasn't in every single episode or anything like that. I think he only showed up, like, maybe half a dozen times in the entire series. But anyway, so Garry Chalk plays Optimus Primal. Now, later on, the Maximals show up in a later version of Transformers. I can't remember which one, but it showed up in one of the series. And instead of bringing Garry Chalk back, they actually got Ron Perlman to voice Optimus Primal. And it was a very different Primal. So fast forward even further... And the most recent Transformers movie was called Rise of the Beasts, and they had Optimus Primal and Cheetor and all those things. And we kind of assumed, since they got Peter Cullen to come back and voice Optimus Prime, we're like, oh, we're gonna get Garry Chalk again, because Garry Chalk still working. He hasn't retired or anything like that. He's still actively working. He's still he's still in his prime. He's doing real well. And we got Ron Perlman. Now, there's a couple different reasons for this. One, Ron Perlman, significantly bigger name than Garry Chalk. A lot of people have never even heard of Garry Chalk. He voice acts like a billion different things. Like, that's another thing I'm going to look up. Garry Chalk. That's him. Yeah, he's Canadian too. I didn't realize that. But that makes sense because SG-1 was shot in Vancouver, I think. So what's he doing now? Television. He has just tons of stuff. He's in Riverdale. He did Dr. Light for Mega Man Fully Charged. He was in Ninjago, Arrow. If you guys remember the Arrow TV series, he was in that. Like, he's still doing a lot of work. For the most part, though it looks like he took a little bit of a break during that which must not be named. Well, he even voice acted for Power Rangers. That's awesome. So anyway, Garry Chalk still working, still remarkably good at what he does. But they decided to go with Ron Perlman because, first of all, again, Ron Perlman, huge name. He's a big Hollywood actor. Versus Garry Chalk is a voice actor and not significantly as well known. Second of all, the flavor of Rise of the Beasts is not the same as Beast Wars. If you watch Beast Wars is brilliant. It is an absolutely brilliant series, but it's a children's television series. And as was kind of popular in the late 90s, there's a fair amount of kind of comic relief, and it's supposed to be a little bit silly. And the version of Optimus Primal in that has a lighter side. Like, he makes jokes and he makes fun of the other Maximals in a good-natured way, and he cracks jokes when he's fighting, and he uses a lot of puns. Like, it's one of the reasons that I love the character so much, because he is kind of silly and fun. I have not seen the more recent series that used Ron Perlman for Optimus Prime, but my understanding of the series is the series itself was a little bit more mature and a little bit more dark. And if I have watched Rise of the Beast, it's not a good movie. But that's true about most of the Transformers movies. There's a few that are bangers, but for the most part, there's a lot to be needed. Don't watch Last Night. So, Rise of the Beasts, Optimus Primal doesn't joke ever. Optimus Primal, I believe, had his sense of humor removed from his spark. He's a very serious character, and the movie itself tries to take itself extremely seriously. And so, because the Garry Chalk version could be serious, there was a lot of times where he got to kind of take that almost Picard-like stance of, this is what it means to be not a human, but this is what it means to be alive. And he was an explorer that was thrust into a war they never wanted to be. So there were some very pivotal moments, but what a lot of people remember about the original Optimus Prime was he was a fun character. He was fun, and that wasn't what they were looking for. So why does this matter to running a game? Well, when you're running the Transformers RPG, and it's only taken me like 12 minutes to get to the actual point of this video. So when you're running a Transformers RPG or any RPG that already has an established canon, an established lore, one of the things you need to look at is, well, what part of the lore am I going to use? Good example outside of Transformers. The Forgotten Realms has existed forever. It's existed since the 80s, which isn't forever, but it's existed almost as long as Dungeons & Dragons in and of itself. And there is crap tons of lore. And the lore doesn't come just from the books themselves. It comes from novels, it comes from video games, it comes from comic books, TV shows. Yeah, I mean, technically, the D&D cartoon wasn't set in the Forgotten Realms, so I guess not TV shows. But now there's some movies, and you can't really use all of the lore in any campaign that you want to run. And the lore kind of changes the mood depending on what you're using. Really good example is a beloved character from the Baldur's Gate franchise, is a ranger who eventually turns into a barbarian named Minsk, and his miniature giant space hamster, Boo. They are comic relief characters. They showed up in Baldur's Gate 1, they showed up in Baldur's Gate 2, they show up in Baldur's Gate 3. They are fan favorites. They've had their own comic book series. They showed up in the Neverwinter MMO that I used to play, and it used to be a great game. It isn't anymore, but it used to be awesome. And so Minx was always meant to be a little bit chaotic and silly. If we look at another example, Acquisitions Incorporated has been shown to be canon in the Forgotten Realms, and they're nothing but nonsense. Whereas if you look at something like the Drizzt novels and stuff like that, that is really serious, sometimes social commentary style stuff. And if you look at things like a lot of the published adventures, like Curse of Strahd is the most popular 5th edition adventure. That's an extremely serious thing. And it can exist in the Forgotten Realms because the Domain of Dread can show up anywhere. But getting back to Transformers, if you're going to be running Transformers, just like if you're running D&D or anything, you're going to be running something in a specific lore setting. You need to decide, do you want Garry Chalk or Ron Perlman? And what I mean by that is, do you want to embrace the lighthearted aspects of the game, or do you want to embrace the more serious? Because Transformers in and of itself has gone the entire gamut. It has been silly and nonsensical. There's a few episodes specifically of Beast Wars that are just nonsense. None of it makes sense. It's just meant to be silly. I'm not as familiar with the Generation 1 cartoons, but I believe there's a little bit of that silliness in there. Though, to be perfectly honest, the Generation 1 cartoons were meant to sell toys. So they had an entirely different purpose. When you get to some of the more modern stuff, it became significantly more popular to be more serious and more grounded and stuff like that. I have not watched a full Transformers series in a very long time, so I don't know what the current mood of Transformers is, but looking over the continuity, both kinds of stories can exist. And you can go from one to the other, but it is really important to kind of sit down with your players and figure out, do you want Garry Chalk or do you want Ron Perlman? Do you want to embrace the silly and fun, or do you want to have really kind of heavy, meaningful stories? And again, they're not mutually exclusive. Beast Wars most definitely did have very, very serious moments. And, you know, they did kind of explore the idea of what it means to be sapient and things like that. And the new version of it, I would assume, probably had some silly stuff that happened, because that's how everything works. I don't think there's a single drama that doesn't have kind of jokes and stuff that show up every so often. People can't just have nothing. But you need to kind of figure out, you know, which version of the lore is the one that your players want to kind of live in, because that's what running a campaign is it's living in the lore for, you know, 3 to 4 hours a week or a month or whatever your schedule is, and so you need to kind of figure out, and that initial thing of choosing Garry Chalk versus Ron Perlman is going to make your life as a GM significantly easier, because now you know the kind of stuff that you want to prep. If you're going for a more Garry Chalk Optimus Primal, then every so often having a little side story that involves like the players accidentally switching bodies, really common trope in kind of science fiction, fantasy style comedies, is something causes them to switch bodies and hilarity ensues. It can actually be really fun as a tabletop RPG to just have the players technically switch characters, but not. Like, they're still the character they were playing, their background is still the same, but they just get to use a different character sheet for that character. And it can be a lot of fun, and you can lean into the hilarity of it by having, you know, the paladin who normally has a big old greatsword come up and just smite people, and he gets switched with the rogue, or I guess in Transformers maybe the scout gets switched with the commander. I think those are the roles. I can't remember, and they moved my bookmarks to the other side. What are the roles here? Analyst, field commander. Yeah, if like the mode master or the scientist switches with the field commander, or even better, the warrior switches with the field commander, and so the warriors used to just going in and they lose a limb, and so the field commander's used to just sitting back and just giving orders, and so the field master runs in and goes, "Why is this not working, guys? Somebody help me!" And somebody immediately comes in and goes, wait a minute, I could do that? Like, there could be a lot of fun in that, but it's definitely a Garry Chalk style of play. Whereas if you want the Ron Perlman, you know, dealing with serious aspects of their backstory, giving them decisions that are actually tough. You know, the idea of the deal with the devil. It's easy enough for me to say. Let me try that one more time. The idea of a deal with the devil. You know, you are dealing with the Decepticons. You capture someone, and they in a more Ron Perlman style situation, the Decepticons could be truly evil beings. They could be accused of war crimes and other just really, really horrible stuff. They could have targeted the family members of the Autobots because it's an extremely evil thing to do. And so you get to a position where you and this is an extremely common thing to see on anything with kind of a military hierarchy drama style for the thing, where you capture them, and that's the right thing to do because, you know, extrajudicial justice is never true justice. You know, you do need to bring them back to be tried and sentenced by a judge, but they go, hey, if you let me live, I will give you info that you need to kind of win this war with the Decepticons. And all you have to do is give me, you know, a lap of luxury style lifestyle, and I will roll on my friends. And then the players have to make this decision. Okay, well, do the ends justify the means? This is a person that deserves to be tried and deserves to be imprisoned or something like that. He shouldn't be rewarded for what he's getting. But the higher ups have decided that in the end, letting this one person who deserves to be punished not get punished and actually get rewarded for turning on his allies is going to save thousands, if not millions, of lives at the end. You know, in the end, this is what's best for everyone. It'll cut years off the war. So we're going to do that. We're going to reward the horrible person for doing horrible things simply because they're valuable to us. And having the players have to deal with that, and probably having some contention within the players themselves, because some people are going to agree with one side and some people are going to agree with the other. Obviously, you should talk to your players before introducing really, really heavy themes like that, because those can be places that people just don't want to go. But again, that is going to be much more of a Ron Perlman style Optimus Primal than a Garry Chalk Optimus Primal. And that doesn't mean that you can't have something like that in a Garry Chalk style campaign. But again, the focus is going to be very different. And there's always going to be exceptions, but the Garry Chalk exceptions are going to be the serious points. The Ron Perlman exceptions are going to be the comical points. So probably, like I said, just in general, for running something in a pre-written universe, in a pre-written campaign setting, figuring out if you want to be a Garry Chalk or a Ron Perlman or something different, but figuring out kind of the mood that your players are looking for, and then going back into the lore to find examples of that either you could update and use in your setting, or can use for inspiration to do other unique, interesting things for your players. That's probably the most useful thing I can tell anyone to do that's using a pre-built setting. Figure out what your players want. And again, I just really like calling it the Garry Chalk versus the Ron Perlman. Just because I think that's really interesting. And again, I love Garry Chalk. I think he's an amazing voice actor. An actor in general. So yeah. As far as more specific things for Essence to 20, I have not run a full Transformers game. I have run a single one-shot of Transformers that didn't go super well, but I learned a lot from it. One of the things that it applies, I guess, to both Transformers and G.I. Joe because so much of Transformers and G.I. Joe's uses firearms and long range weapons in general. Like melee weapons are just not really as big a thing as they are with Power Rangers, and then especially if you switch to something like D&D, where half of your classes are going to be melee based classes. Is your battlefields need to be big, especially for Transformers, because the core defining feature of the Transformers role-playing game compared to G.I. Joe or Power Rangers is the alternate mode. The fact that Transformers can transform is a big deal. And by making sure that your maps or whatever you're using, any battlefield that you describe, should be large enough that transforming is a choice that they want to make during combat, outside of combat. Everything needs to be bigger in Transformers because, first of all, the Transformers themselves are bigger than your normal players. They're very, 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 very large. And so your normal map where your squares are all 5 feet and you may have like a 20 by 20 area, and that would be a big battlefield. You know, that in and of itself is 100 feet by 100 feet. That's a really large map for a single battle encounter in D&D. A lot of times you're looking at like a 5 by 5 grid for a room in a dungeon. In Transformers, a 100 foot by 100 foot area is tiny, and they can cross the entire area in less than a turn, depending on whether or not they're in their vehicle form and if they're dashing or anything like that. So when you're creating just any kind of encounter, whether it's going to be a combat encounter, whether it's going to be a more puzzle-based encounter, everything needs to be bigger for Transformers. Your ranges need to be longer. And you also have to take into account if there are melee-based characters in your party, because if you do make a very large field counting on the ranged characters to be able to hit everything, and then you make sure that all of the enemies are also ranged and very far away, you're going to frustrate your melee-based characters because they have to spend a turn or two just getting up while all of their friends are just going and blasting and stuff like that. And again, the transformation aspect can minimize that, but be sure to kind of mix up your roles in your enemies to ensure that you're giving a genuine challenge to all of the players instead of just some of the players. The other thing that is essential for Transformers compared to something like Power Rangers. Power Rangers is a Monster of the Week style game. Maybe not every session, but every episode, you're going to have a monster that shows up, and they're going to have to learn something from it and eventually to defeat that particular monster. That's what happened in my mini campaign. My mini campaign was effectively just one episode, and they fought. Really, phone? Guys, I'll be right back. At least this isn't copyrighted music. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. I had my phone charging by my bed because I have a fast charger over there. And sure enough, whenever I turn this on, something calls. It's great. So, Power Rangers again, Monster of the Week. Every week there's just something different. Transformers in and of itself is not designed for a Monster of the Week style game. It is designed to have a set number of enemies that keep coming back. And for an RPG in general, that's not the norm. Again, I tend to relate everything back to D&D because, one, D&D was technically my second, but the first RPG that I played extensively. And then 5th edition is where I really kind of dove in deep to Dungeons & Dragons. And it's also the most popular RPG on the planet. So a lot of people are going to be familiar with it. With D&D, you don't really have quote unquote recurring villains that you're constantly dealing with. You may have a big bad end guy or enemies that show up for multiple sessions or are related to multiple sessions, but the end goal is to go and defeat that one, and then you move on to the next thing. You don't have battle where you win, they go away, and then they come back, they go away, and they come back. And that's true of most RPGs. You generally fight a creature once, and then you're done with it. That's not how Transformers RPG or the G.I. Joe RPG are really designed. If you look at any Transformers cartoon, whether we're talking Gen 1, whether we're talking the new stuff, Beast Wars, Beast Machines, you have, like, I think Beast Wars is probably the perfect example of it. You had the bad guy roster: Megatron, Scorponok, Tarantulas, eventually Black Arachnia and Inferno, Pterosaur, Waspinator, Terrorize! I love Waspinator. You look at the Geo1 stuff, you have Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave. And so you have these bad guys that just keep showing up. And that's something that you really, really need to lean into in Transformers is the bad guys should have a roster that shows up, and it should start to get personal. And what I mean by that is it's not outside the realm of reason for the for your team of Transformers to develop a rivalry with a particular, or member of your team of Transformers to develop a rivalry with a particular Decepticon. And I think it should be encouraged. I don't think everybody needs a nemesis, and I believe there's either a role or an influence or something in one of the later books that actually allows you to have like a nemesis style thing. I can't remember if it's an influence or an origin or something like that, but it is kind of an essential part of the lores that they start kind of developing these rivalries. Like, obviously, the Optimus versus Megatron is an essential rivalry. But you'll start doing other things like if you're dealing with Starscream, and you have an Autobot that also has a flying alt mode. It would be very simple for those two to develop a rivalry between each other, because they're both filling a similar role on their teams. And Starscream in and of himself is extremely narcissistic, extremely self-important, and will always feel and he's a traitor, to be perfectly honest. Like, he's always afraid that someone is going to replace him. Massive inferiority complex that he manifests as a superiority complex. So having him see another character that fills a similar role, even if it's for the bad guys, he's going to feel the need to show off and show that he's significantly better than this other version of himself. So choosing your threats based on the fact that they kind of show the darker version of the Autobot team that you are GMing for can be an extremely satisfying thing. And then getting used to the idea that defeating named Decepticons doesn't mean you destroy them or capture them. It means that they flee. And that can be really, really satisfying, because depending on the relationship between your players and this particular Decepticon, it can kind of fuel your players to want to go out more and try again to actually capture them. Or it can be like in the idea of Starscream, if they're constantly like goading and taunting the other team, going, I'm so much better than you, you can never hurt me, and then they force him to retreat, that can feel like an even better victory than destroying him, because now he has to kind of run away with his tail between his legs. And in later conflicts, he can go, hey, look, aren't you the guy that broke the speed barrier and create a new record for running away like a chicken faster than anyone else ever? Wasn't that you? And that can add a lot of fun to the more Garry Chalk style games. So yeah, lean really, really heavily into the idea that choosing your threats carefully and picking a couple that your players seem to define with or seem to attach to a lot can be really, really fun and give them a lot of satisfaction when they do have a rival. On that note, don't exclusively use the same team, because that will get boring every so often. But having a rival and having them show up every so often will add a little bit more weight for that particular character in that conflict. At the same time, do not be afraid to use the generic Decepticon threat blocks to pad things out. The Transformers being outnumbered is a normal thing. And in RPGs in general, the players being outnumbered is a relatively normal thing. So have one or two basically commanders running this particular event, and then a bunch of little no-name Decepticons in there to add a little bit more conflict will help immensely. It will allow your players kind of the satisfaction of being able to destroy or capture some members so that they feel that they're doing something, but the big names are going to be retreating until the point in your campaign where you're ready to retire that particular character, either by having them die or by having them get imprisoned. And getting them imprisoned can be even more fun, because then the Decepticons can come and try and make a prison break, and depending on how that goes, you might reintroduce a villain that they thought that they were done with because it got broken out of prison. So lots of fun stuff there, but don't shy away from using no-name stat blocks. They're in there for a reason, and it will get very, very annoying for your players if they never win, like every single time the bad guys run away. That also does bring up the idea that I've brought up many, many times when talking about high-level D&D. When you're creating encounters, you cannot make the only win condition is you kill the bad guys. It's a mistake a lot of seasoned DMs make, where it's basically every single combat encounter is this pool of hit points versus this pool of hit points, and whichever one gets lowered to zero for first, the other team wins. That works up until about mid-tier 3. And then players are just in D&D. Then players are so powerful you can't really kill them off. And it starts happening near the end of tier 2. So you need to have something other than, oh, you're fighting the Decepticons, which side will win? No, have things, oh, the Decepticons are attempting to steal all the Energon from this particular place, and if they drain the entire area of Energon, because it's effectively life energy, that area will be barren and inhospitable to human life for generations. So it's not so much we need to defeat the Decepticons, we have to stop them from getting the Energon. Things like that. The Decepticons are attempting to hijack a shipment of Energon, or Decepticons are attempting to kidnap a scientist that they're going to try to use to make their stuff better, or a million different things like that. Do not make every single encounter with Decepticons, let's see who can shoot better. Vary it. Make interesting things. They're trying to destroy a dam so it will flood out a base and you guys will lose power because the dam is hydroelectric. Or, give them more varied situations to deal with. It doesn't mean you can't have you met the Decepticons and now you're going to fight to the finish. This is perfectly fine. You cannot just make everything about that. You need to have more varied options. And putting in options that don't have a hit point meter can be significantly more fun, because then using your attack to try and take out members of the other team is still useful, because by taking them out there's less things that the other team can do, but it can be even more useful to use control like abilities, putting up walls, destroying terrain to make things more difficult for the other team to move in becomes significantly more useful, because you're not trying to kill the other team, you're trying to save people, or you're trying to stop them from stealing, or you're trying to prevent them from launching a satellite. Lots of different things where you get to do things, or maybe they're trying to prevent you from launching a satellite, so it turns into more of like a tower defense style situation where they're just going to keep sending waves and waves of no-name bots, and then every so often a named threat will show up. That is a really, really interesting thing, and destroying the enemies is a valid option for people that like to be more aggressive, but another valid option is simply sitting there and finding ways to prevent taking damage. So yes, be as varied in your... Thank you, phone. Be as varied in your approach to encounter designs. And this is both social encounters, exploration encounters, or all of those, not just both, but social encounters, exploration encounters, and combat encounters. So anyway, I hope this is useful information. Like I said, most of this stuff is useful for kind of any RPG, but I did tailor it specifically to Transformers because that's what was asked. So yeah, I hope this is useful to you. And I have to remember your name. Very, very sorry. Mr. Sims Music. I hope this is useful to you, and I hope this is useful to everyone, because creating interesting encounters in general is something that I really enjoy doing. And combat encounters, just as a whole, I'm not the greatest at creating. I've had a few that I've been kind of proud that they turned out that way, but for the most part, the best encounters that I've created, I wouldn't necessarily call combat encounters. It's just not my skill set. Even ones like the final battle in Realms of the Wild was a quote-unquote combat encounter, and I made it rough. I made it really, really rough. And they didn't win through combat. They won through some weird outside-the-box stuff and by using persuasion effectively. And it was probably the best encounter of the entire campaign. It was a 5.5-year-long campaign, and it was probably the best encounter we had. It was so amazing and fun. But as a combat encounter, it was boring as hell. It was just massively stacked against the players. So anyway, hope that's useful for you guys. That is going to be all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.